Good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome to the special meeting on this Tuesday, June 30th. The time is now 6:30, and we will call this meeting to order. I'll first be led in the invocation by Trustee Stripling, followed by the pledges, and then the district statement or mission statement by Trustee Moncrief. Please stand.
Father, we come to you tonight with bowed heads and humbled hearts just to say thank you. Father, we say thank you for allowing us to wake this morning and go about our day. And Father, we say thank you for allowing us to stand here and do the business of the district and serving not only the students of this district, but the citizens of this community and the teachers and staff and administration of this district. Father, we ask that you guide us as we go throughout the night. Provide us with the wisdom necessary to make the right decisions, to do the best, again, for this community and this district. We ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen. Amen.
DeSoto ISD will prepare each student academically and socially to be a problem solver and productive citizen for a 21st century global society.
Thank you, Trustee Stripling, Trustee Moncrief. 1A also calls for us to read the emergency statement. DeSoto ISD takes safety of our students, employees, and guests very seriously, including those with us tonight. In the emergency situations such as a fire, please exit the building using one of the marked exits unless directed otherwise. Should we experience inclement weather such as a tornado, we will ask all guests to quickly move into the interior of the building, away from all doors and windows. Our Emergency Operations Administrator will monitor the situation at all times and advise of any potential situations, as well as coordinate with the local emergency responders regarding when the situation has passed. Thank you. Last item on item 1A calls for us to establish a quorum. We do have a quorum with 6 board members present. Item 1B calls for us to conduct a public hearing, 2015-2016 budget. We will open that hearing for 3 minutes. The time is now 6:33, and we will close if no one speaks at 6:36. Time is now 6:36, and we will close the public hearing for the budget for 2015-2016. That brings us to item 2, which is our consent items. Consent item A, order the notification of the tax ratification election. B, code of conduct. And C, technology computer lease cycle 3. What's the pleasure of the board?
Move to approve as presented.
We have a motion by Trustee Stripling, second by Trustee Hall. I'll call the question. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. That motion carries 6-0. Brings us to our action items. Item 3, beginning item A, adoption of the 2015-2016 budget for general operation, child nutrition, debt service funds, and QZAP funds. Item B, final budget amendment. Dr. Harris.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. I'll read the background information and as also the recommendation, and then I'll allow Mr. Laborde to elaborate any additional information. School districts are required to adopt the 2015-16 budgets on or before the first day of the 2015 fiscal school year, June 30th. By law, the Board of Trustees must approve the budget by fund, example 199 general operating fund, and by function 11 instruction. The attached proposed budget for general operating, child nutrition, and debt services funds are a summation of the detailed information from each of the workshops. Those proposed budgets include all of the revenues and expenditure for the 2015-16 fiscal year that staff is aware at this time. The attached one-page proposed budget summarizes key elements of the proposed budgets. Notice of public meeting to discuss budget was published in the Focus Daily News within the appropriate time frame. And also, I just remind the board that this budget is based upon the goals that's set aside by the district and some of the activities that the board, when they set our goals for the prior year. And so this budget addresses those goals. The recommendations approve general operating, child nutrition, debt service funds as presented. Mr. Lord, any additional information like that?
Yes, sir, Dr. Harris, just one thing. If you'll notice on the your one page, the general fund has a slightly higher fund balance, planned fund balance than we talked about during the workshop, of about $315,000. The main reason for this was we had a decrease in some of our benefits. We overestimated some of our benefits for some of the positions, and that savings was about $325,000. We had an increase in board travel of $14,000. We had an increase in our custodial services to go from the split cleaning at the middle schools to an every night cleaning at the middle schools in the classrooms, and that was about $82,000. So for a difference of about $315,000, for a difference of about $239,000, when you add that to the fund balance that we discussed in the workshop, that gives us about the $315,000 that's on this one. That's the only changes from the workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Laborde. Dr. Harris. Board, you've heard the recommendation from administration. Entertain a motion at this time.
Move to approve the 2015-2016 budget as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Trustee Stripling, and I want to clarify that motion. Are you including the final budget amendment B as well?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion by Trustee Stripling, second by Trustee Hooper. Any discussion? Trustee Hall.
Over the last couple of weeks, I've been communicating some with Mr. LaBorde, and I've got great concern over some of the items in this budget. The one that sticks out like a sore thumb, actually, the instructional leadership. This has increased by 121 or 122% since 2012-13. And to make that realistic, it's about two and a quarter times what it was in 2012-13. It went from 1,075,000 to 2,389,000. On that same basis, the instruction went up about 28%. That's so far out of proportion, and we need to get a handle on that, I believe. I don't know. I mean, I've gone back and forth with them on this, and I proposed about a $600,000 cutback on it to bring it back to where it was around the 2013-14 budget. And I was told there wasn't enough money available to get anywhere near that without doing or with a non-salary, non-mandated programs. And I think that it may be necessary to start looking in that direction, because from my viewpoint, instruction is probably the most important part of this entire budget. And we don't get to work on this a lot. We get one time a year. And the one meeting we had to discuss this, we really didn't have but maybe about an hour to discuss it, which on something like this, as important as this budget is, and as important as it is to us as a board, that's not enough time to really get in. Now, you know, I'm not making the budget, but that's just way too much. There were a couple other areas, and what I actually looked at was like on the budget, it was like there was one that was like 67% increase. There was 152% increase, 57% increase. Somehow we've let some things kind of get out of whack. Another thing that I wanted to bring up too is the QZAB. We voted as a board to take on a $9.5 million debt last year. Actually, it's been less than a year now. We've spent probably over half of that now for various things that do fall under what we can use that money for. But our payback on that right now is if we go with what is budgeted, we're going to be paying that for 25 years. That bothers me. I recommended that we increase our payment. Right now, our payment is going to be somewhere around $375,000. Is that right, Mr. LaBorde? Plus interest. And we're looking at almost 25 years. That's the minimum payment is really what it is. And I happened to pull this up. This is a credit card statement. And this is how credit card people tell you how much you need to pay on your bill. This one says if you pay only the minimum payment, which is pretty much what we're doing here, it takes 24 years to pay off this particular credit card bill. And that seems to be what we're doing with QZAB. And I think that's a travesty. I think for our community, that's a horrible way for us to do business. If we were to put another couple of $100,000 a year, we could cut that down to maybe 15 years. But most of us will be gone before that's ever paid off. And what we've done, we've used it, and I understand, that we used it for good things, but most of the things we used it for are going to be gone much, much earlier than the time that we get this loan paid off. We're up against another obstacle this year for all employees, and that's the additional insurance premium that you're going to have to pay. We gave the teachers, for instance, a $2,400 a year raise, and over probably half of that's going to go back into their insurance this year. And somehow we have got to come up with a solution to that. And that means cutting some things. Now, it may be too late right now, but my understanding is we can amend this budget even after it's passed tonight. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but somehow we've got to get a handle on these expenses, and this debt really bothers me. We have about $13 million in the fund balance, but when you take the $9.5 million debt that we created, that's not really as true of fund balance as it might seem. So I don't know what we do about it, but this concerns me. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hall. Yes, sir, Dr. Harris.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Hall, and I appreciate those comments as well. And I would say to the board that as we start our planning year, because as you remember, at the board's request of creating programs of interest in the district, so when you create programs of interest, you do create somebody that has to oversee those programs. So I would say to the board as we begin to plan for next year, if there's some program somewhere that the board has an interest in, and possibly cutting, I think that's a conversation that we need to have in the planning year. So, and that's, that's something to look at. But I would say that, many of those programs also generated us students in seats as well. So you balance that with, program costs versus the growth that we've seen of students coming back to our district because of those programs. And I don't know if you guys have got any information, but our male leadership program this summer at West Middle School has been phenomenal. I mean, these are students who typically, may not be in our district, and they've come to be a part of that. We've seen our collegiate magnet program. Students have come from far and near be a part of the collegiate magnet program. Same thing for our middle school ISTEAM program. Our early college program, we have students that are coming in because of that. So we did this based upon the vision and direction of the board of adding programs in order to increase students back into our district. And so I think when we start the planning process, I think we have a retreat plan for the end of August, I think it is. And I think that's when you have those discussions as a board and decide what will be the vision for the district moving forward? What are the programs that we feel that are programs that have been good for the district? If there are some programs that you feel like that maybe they're not being beneficial to the district, I think we have that conversation at that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Trustee Hooper. Yeah. Trustee Daniel.
I just want to be sure that I understand exactly what's going on. If we approve the budget tonight, the next next time we meet, we can propose an amendment. We can say, wait a minute, I think we should be nicer to our teachers. I think we should find the money somewhere to pay this extra insurance premium. Or we can say, wait a minute, we've budgeted for enough teachers for the middle school to go to block scheduling and have 6 classes for each teacher, but we haven't budgeted enough money for the high school to keep block scheduling and have 6 classes for each teacher. Because the high school teachers teach 1 full class more than the middle school teachers will, and that's a load of about 40 kids if you looked at the student-teacher ratio. So if I want to bring those up as far as budget amendments to allow money for those things, I can do that.
We can definitely have those discussions. Just remember that each time that we make an amendment, if you're adding something into the budget, that means that at the end of the year, when you ask, I would say to the board, when you ask for a balanced budget, you may want to understand that we may not be at a balanced budget. That's what the discussion would be. So, and what we try to do every year is, our goal has been, we're going to bring you a balanced budget at the end of the year where we're going to start off at the right point. You also have a policy in place as a board that says there's so much money that we must put back into the fund balance at the end of the year. So those are all policy. That's a policy that you guys put in place. And, I totally understand there are some districts that go into a school district, and I mean, I know one nearby that's going in a few $1 million, over budget already. I would definitely advise against that, because probably the reason they did that because they're a fast growth type school district. So I wouldn't advise us doing that. But yes, we can have those discussions as long as we know what the long run outcome is going to be. Is that at the end of the year we may or may not have a balanced budget.
Well, I'm thinking if I can propose these things, then we can find some places to cut somewhere. The minimum that we put in the fund balance is the minimum. Are we putting anything over the minimum into the fund balance right now?
Ms. LeBoard could have answer.
The board policy states that we can't present a deficit budget until the fund balance reaches the 20% mark of the prior year expenditures. At this time, we're standing at about 13 or 14%. After the audit, I would think with this budget we would be at the 15% mark. In accordance with board policy, we have to bring you a balanced budget, or a budget that would, until we reach that point where we're at the 20% mark. It doesn't say anything about the board making amendments to the budget, as far as I know.
Okay.
Well, I definitely want a balanced budget, but I think we can make cuts to do some things to give our some perks to our teachers so we can keep our teachers. Because as I see it right now, we've lost a ton of teachers and we're still not hiring back to replace teacher for teacher. And when we asked you about giving them the $2,400 pay raise, we were told we had plenty of money to give that raise to every teacher in the district. And now we're being told, but we can't rehire some of the teachers, or we can't hire in place of some of the teachers who left. Well, it seems like, yes, we can if we had enough money to vote that pay raise in.
I appreciate that, Ms. Ann, but, I also want to remind the board that 3 years ago that our employees had not received a raise for several years. We've given teacher raises every single year for the last 3 years. We've done that. Now, you've got to also understand the history of where we came from as a district, understanding where we were financially at that time. So there's some background information to that as well. So, we'd love to do a lot of things, but the other reason why you couldn't make those significant raises, early on, is that we didn't have the student enrollment in order to do that. So, we need to have a really good sit down and talk about the whole process, because one, you can't give teachers raises if you don't have students, because students are going to drive that for you. Okay, so we turn around the enrollment, so we see enrollment growth. Remember, once you give a teacher a raise, that doesn't go away. That raise doesn't go away. Whether you are losing students or whatever, that raise is going to stay there. So you got a balance between how fast you go versus how your student population goes at the same time. Once you do that raise, it's there. You can't come back and say, we need to reduce teacher pay. So, and I think that's a discussion that we have in a workshop of what is that projection. I think Mr. Laborde gave y'all a projection of, you gave him that, right? Enrollment projections?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So you got to look at both of them at the same time in order to make decisions about how budget goes. And I think it'd be good if we just had a really good, thorough conversation about how do you put that together, how you look at enrollment trends and what you can do as a district. And just also remember this, part of the reason why you try to have a fund balance is that if we were hit with a catastrophic situation, say a tornado came through and damaged a lot of our buildings, remember that fund balance is there also as a part to help get you back on track as quickly as you can. So the fund balance serves more than just, having money sitting there. So if that was to happen, we've got to repair this building, we got to repair this building, and nobody's going to give us the money to be able to go out and do that. God forbid that happens. But part of the reason why you want to have those reserves in place is to be prepared if something like that did take place.
I understand that perfectly, and I don't want a deficit budget, and I don't want to reduce the fund balance, but I do want to cut some of the spending and move that money around.
Trustee Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I certainly understand the concerns of my fellow colleagues. I take a different perspective on it just because I remember being here when we didn't have the money and we didn't have the programs and we were losing students. And so one of the first things we said was we needed to turn that around from losing students. And the way we did that was through creating the types of programs that we created to not only retain our students that were leaving, going to the magnet programs in Dallas, but to also attract students. And so in order to build programs, you have to spend money. Prior to that, when the state cut the education budget, and then the housing market took a tremendous tank, this district had to make cuts. And prior to me coming on the board, that was pretty much the talk. Make cuts, make cuts. And my push was, let's not talk cuts, let's talk cost savings. Because it's a different terminology and you create a different way of thinking. I can cut anywhere. I can cut anybody. But when you start talking about cost savings, it causes you to take a hard look at where your money is being spent. The thought process was that we would create cost savings as far away from students as possible. That's what you do. And that meant affecting buildings. That meant affecting people, adults. And so that's what we had to do. And in doing so, some folks had to tighten up on the britches a little bit. I mean, that's just what it was. We all did. And until we got to a place where we are now back with a healthy fund balance and the kind of programs that we said we wanted, and as Trustee Hooper always says, to create a world-class district. So we can always cut. I just want this board to understand that if we start talking about cutting, you have to understand the ripple effect of any cut. And I promise you, we spent probably 15 days out of an entire month going through that process. Because I can cut anywhere, but if you don't understand the downline of what that cut affects, then you don't really understand the outcome of making said cut. And so while it does look like the budget is increased, it is increased to accommodate the fact that we've gone from 8,700 students to roughly 9,600 students. So how do you accommodate that, or 9,400 students? So how do you accommodate that? You got to spend money. That's just the way it works. You don't spend the money, they don't come, and then we have other complaints that, well, you don't have the facilities, you don't have the equipment and things like that for that. So I don't want to drag this out. I just want us to be careful that when we make statements and we say things, that we understand a little more of the history behind it, and know that we want everybody to be properly paid, but we want to create the programs to sustain the programs. Remember, we created programs, or programs were created before Dr. Harris got here. We had programs in place that, guess what? They weren't even funded. So ladies and gentlemen, they look real good on paper, but they had no substance because they had no money behind it. And so if we're going to go through and start talking about the programs that we have, now if we got a program that students aren't attending and we haven't getting anything, and there's no return on that, fine, cut it, get rid of it. I don't have a problem with that. But let's just make sure that if that's the direction that we're going to go, that we ensure that we are looking at our students to protect our students, because that's really what we're here for. At the end of the day, that's what we're here for. So, and as far as a budget is concerned, from the finance world, when you create an operating budget, when you start talking about putting money into something else, that means that money that you put in, say, pot A, has to come from somewhere within the confines of the overall budget that was created, which means you have to find that money out of another pot. So I can take it from pot F and put it in pot A, but taking that money from pot F typically means either whatever we budgeted for in that particular pot, either we've found a way to not spend as much, and Mr. Laborde talks about that quite often, just like he just did tonight. If you overestimate something and that you can move that money, that's how you make your budget amendments. You're basically moving money around within the restraints of the overall budget that we're approving tonight. So we approve this budget. If we have areas where we've funded for, or that we appropriated for, and it's either we estimated too much, we can move that money. That's the easiest thing to do. What we cannot do is reach outside of that and try to pull money in. That's not how that works. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Strickland. Trustee Hooper.
First, I want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments, as well as their careful deliberation in reviewing the budget and, preparing for this point. What I want to say in response to specifically some of the issues that were brought by Trustee Daniel in terms of insurance. I know that previously we discussed about that also being a priority of the administration as well as the board, because I know we talked about the rising cost of insurance. We also talked about in the event that we are successful in the TRE passage, that along with other board priorities as well as district priorities are going to be in the first set of things that are addressed in that. So I take that as a statement that was made in good faith, because I too have had a long list of things that I bugged the superintendent about, things that I think that are beneficial to students that aren't necessarily included in this budget, which are in part why I supported going forward with the TRE, because that does allow us some additional revenues to address some of these other priorities, not just infusions into dealing with our campuses and our students directly, but also the infusion and investments that we need to make with the workforce. We've made salary adjustments and things of that sort, but we also understand that there's some other things that we need to concentrate on when it comes to our workforce, insurance being one of them. And I know that we actually asked for not necessarily for this meeting, but for later on to kind of see, whether it's 25% or 50% or 75% or all, what those look like in different numbers. So that when we, around September-ish, we're going to be having another conversation about budget anyway, because, if we're successful in that, to kind of see what those dollars look like. So I'm comfortable with the budget as it is. I am anticipating that we'll have some good news in September, and we'll be able to address a number of those other priorities because, some of my other issues deal with some of the aesthetic and structural issues concerning some of the programs that we are developing that will go online in the fall. However, I do think that the content is there. I think the staffing will be solid. So I'm comfortable with moving forward and addressing some of those other priorities later, and hopefully, depending on how rapidly we're able to move with that, maybe in the spring, we can make some modifications to the aesthetic of the building and accommodate some of the things that we want to do there. So I'm comfortable, and I pretty much asked most of my questions, and I think Dr. Harris and I have had very long meetings and phone calls about this budget, and me trying to squeeze it as much as I thought that was possible. But I'm ready to move forward.
I had a question.
Thank you, Trustee Hooper. Trustee Moncrief.
I don't know that I've gotten an answer to this yet, and just to sum it up in plain language for the folks who are sitting out there actually watching this meeting, to Ms. Daniels' concern about underwriting some of the costs for the increased insurance for the teachers, exactly how much money are we talking about?
Would that be to cover the entire amount?
I believe she was proposing for us, the district, to cover 1/2 of the increased amount. Was
The
that,
last time we talked about it, we talked about 1/2
okay.
of the increased amount.
Can I make a quick comment? We're talking about all the employees, aren't we? Not just teachers. Insurance?
Yeah, that'll be something that
All
the board
insurance.
decides.
Yeah.
Just a rough amount, and I haven't pulled the number for for what the increase will be this year, but on a rough estimate, it would be about $420,000 to do half.
Okay. So it's kind of a Hobson's choice at this point. I mean, on the one hand, if I go out here and I ask a teacher, just plain language, would you rather me pay for half of your insurance or you get some extra money that may or may not get eaten up? They're probably going to say, I want my extra money. And I'll maybe try to figure out my insurance. Not to say that it's not important, but I'm just trying to put it in plain language, for folks who just need plain meaning of stuff. And then on the other hand, if we're talking about, well, we may have to cut some folks so that we can pay insurance for a few, and then we've got the burn-in competitiveness of the education market around us. We're competing with the charter schools, and we're competing with a new school that's coming out in the fall over there on Hampton Road. And then we're talking about trying to stay on the cutting edge, because education nowadays, folks, it's flash and bang. That's what people want. They want the magnet programs, and we're trying to give that to them. They want the early childhood centers, and we're trying to give that to them. But it just comes at a cost, and it's just going to become a real cost-benefit analysis to figure out what essentially is more important to, first of all, the kids. Are we going to be shortchanging them? And then the other layer, the teachers, what's going to keep the good ones here teaching, the good ones? Because ultimately, it's going to come down to how the kids are going to benefit. And so that's the real cost-benefit analysis. So if at the end of the day, for right now, if what we're saying is that we will approve what we've got to kind of stay in the game, because that's what we got to do. We got to stay in the game. We can't go backwards and fall out the race. Then I'm comfortable with us doing that, and certainly looking at making adjustments down the road if we have to. For example, if we realize that by the fall or so that new charter school took half of our kids, which I doubt that will happen. But it's just some hard questions that we have to deal with. And if it means that maybe next year we might have to tighten our belts a little bit more, then that's the adjustment that we'll make. But for right now, I'm just concerned about us slipping backwards with the strides and the progress that we've made. Standards and excellence, it all comes at a cost. We got to pay for it. We got to pay to upgrade. So that's kind of where I am.
And if I may, just real quick, Mr. President, before we get it, and remember, just to kind of reiterate what Dr. Harris said, you have to understand that when you give a salary, you can't take a salary back. I can reduce the part we pay for insurance. We can reduce that, but once I give you $60,000, I can't come at you next year and say I'm going to give you $58,000. It just doesn't work that way. So where the adjustments have to take place, if you're looking at that, you can make the adjustments in the insurance, the portion that we pay into, and typically that, and realistically, that's what happened before. That's how we had to peel back, because when we didn't have the money and raises were given because the state said we had to give raises, then we said, okay, we have to find other ways in order to save money, and that was one of the places that had to take a hit. It's kind of a wash for teachers, I mean, in essence, and I think that's to Ms. Daniels' point. It's kind of a wash. You give them the raise, but they're having to pay more in the insurance, so for them it's a wash. But from a budgetary standpoint from the district, we gave the raise, so we pulled back on the insurance. It's kind of a wash for us too, but we're not giving the raise plus maintaining the insurance, which then financially would have pushed us deeper. So, but again, you can't pull back the raises. You can pull back money from everywhere else, but not those places. So, and I'm done. We can move on after that.
Trustee Hooper.
And I know Dr. Harris is wanting to say something. I do want to say we talked about cuts in terms of the staff are not filling positions. I just kind of want to clean some of that up. I know that we try to staff according to a staffing ratio, and so in some. According to some ratio, per the information that we were provided, I know that some were being overstaffed. I mean, and that was just the nature of the beast. And so when those positions became available, we tried to create this equitable staffing ratio. And so it may have looked like, we made cuts or we didn't fulfill this position, but it was according to trying to fit within this staffing ratio. And the other part of the staffing ratio that we're going to receive, I'm assuming, is the administrator ratio in conjunction with the amount of kids. And I know that that's in part why the decision was made with Moats in terms of administrators there. In terms of the impact that them getting a larger influx of kids, what that is going to do as far as the administrative demand. So I don't want it to get misconstrued that we're letting go of a whole bunch of teachers or any of those types of things, because that's not true. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that nobody has to be fearful that they're going to get a letter to say, don't come back, because that's not true. So,
And just one other thing, I think it was 3 years ago, I think when we'd been paying teachers were paying, well, employees were paying quite a bit for insurance. And I think it was 3 years ago when we asked them to vote, either they wanted pay increase or they wanted the insurance. They chose the pay increase and not the insurance. They did exactly what you said. And that was a survey that was done among the staff. And that's the first pay increase that we did 3 years ago. And then we did a pay increase last year, and then we're doing a no. So 3 years in a row, we made compensation to teacher salary. But they did vote the first year that they chose to have increase in salary versus doing insurance. Now, it may have changed if we were to do a survey at this point. It may have changed with the way the healthcare system is working. So someone may now choose to say, well, I much rather have the majority, because we went with the majority, may choose to say, I much rather have insurance care. But the bottom line is, when we get this thing done in September, that is our priority, is to increase health care. That's really the bottom line.
If I may, just real quick, the insurance did go up this year to $341 for the minimum coverage from $325. Currently, we're paying the $250. So to make that change, we have approximately 897 employees who are on the insurance program. So to make that change would cost $495,000 to do half of it. So that would be, with the current insurance rates of $341, it went up from $325 to $341 for the minimum.
Thank you, Mr. Laborde. Trustee Hall?
Yeah, I have a quick question. The teachers, I know in the material you gave us, there were overstaffing, and I think it came up to around 8, but I've heard as many as 18. Is that being taken care of through attrition or through retirements, or how is that being handled?
I didn't understand that question.
Well, on the information you gave us on the staffing, it adds up to about eight teachers over what we need. Is it more than that, less than that, and how are you handling it? That's what I'm curious about.
We are going by the staffing ratio that was approved by the district. So many teachers per students on the campus. Now, we'll say this, and once again, it's always discussion, is that when we look at the staffing ratio, so I would say this, we've got a plan for this. If we have a school that's, what's that?
Right.
Well,
I want to know how you're going to handle those that are over.
If they're over, we're going to get in line with the staffing ratio. So that means that it'll be absorbed. So we're not getting rid of any teachers. So, okay. Through attrition, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, through attrition.
So your people who are resigning or retiring or whatever is going to make up for that? Because that's what I'm curious about.
That's correct. And let me just say this also. Remember, even when we had the hardest hit times, we did not let go of any employees. Even when we had the most difficult time that we had in the district, we did not fire any employees. We did not do a rift in the district. We kept all employees on in the district. We have never, ever gotten rid of any employees in the district. We sucked that up, and that's what we did. We made cuts in other places when we didn't do that. So no employee can ever say that this district has fired employees. We have never gotten rid of employees. For that reason, yes. So, okay, well, under me, since I've been here, we have never fired employees. So, let me be real clear.
Well, Board, this is definitely something that we've talked about for a while because it is very important, and the community should know that it's important. We take this part in this portion very seriously, and that's why 14 days ago we had our first budget workshop. 14 days ago we saw this information, and based on those 14 days we had an opportunity to approach administration, talk about different changes that we want to see within the budget, and Trustee Hall did do that. And so he brought those recommendations to administration. And after we reviewed those, they would have involved us reducing force. And as we've just discussed, we do not want to terminate any employee from this district behind cost savings. And so that is why we didn't proceed with those recommended changes. That's not to say, however, that we can't make amendments moving forward. That's not to say that other things we can't take a look at and have a reduction there. We just decided, and I think as we've heard the comments here, it's the spirit of this board that we would not reduce force. Secondly, this will be the fifth balanced budget that we pass as a district. And we did put money back into the fund balance. And if you can recall, part of the reason why when we looked at this budget, there are not a lot of points that we can reduce is because before we gave the teacher raises, that's what administration did. So they started this process long before we got the budget. So we've kind of got the leftover of items to consider because they had already taken care of the items that were over budgeted prior to. So we increased teacher pay. Teacher got about a 5% raise this year. So that's something we can be proud of, this community can be proud of. We also have the TRE coming up in September, which if our community has the trust that we think they have in us and the value that we add to their students, they will overwhelmingly vote in support of that. And that adds more money to the budget that we have for consideration moving forward. So we've been creative with our funding. We also know that property values are going up. So this is a good point for us. And as Dr. Harris already mentioned prior to, and I won't beat a dead horse, but we've got to make sure that we measure twice and cut once, right? When we look at this budget and we looked at giving teachers raises, it was based on everything that's going on in our community as far as people moving to the community, as far as students enrolling in the community. But it was also tempered, based on our market value that we've seen crash before, based on students that we've seen leave the district before. We had to make sure this was a time to move forward with that. And I think this board and this administration has done a good job of that and making sure that we will be in sound financial footing and making this move. So I think this is a budget we can all be proud of. If Mr. C was here, I think he'd be proud of it too, as we know he is a budget stickler. But nevertheless, board, if we've had all the comments and discussion, we have a motion on the floor by Trustee Stripling, a second by Trustee Hooper. At this point, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving this budget, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. That carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you, board.
And that also included the budget amendment.
And that did include the budget amendment. Thank you, as was indicated in the motion. Thank you, Trustee Hooper. That brings us to item 4, which is our executive session. We do have need of executive session tonight. And so at this time, we'll move into executive session under 551.074 personnel to hear level 3 grievance of Andrea Levine. And so it is now 7:23, and we'll go into executive session at this time. We will now conclude our closed meeting deliberation and reconvene in open session. It is June 30th, 2015, and the time is 10:42 p.m. Board, is there any recommendation?
Mr. President, I recommend that pending the directed investigation that this board is directed to administration, that we take no action at this time.
We have a motion by Trustee Stripling. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Hall. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously 7-0. Board, with no further action on the agenda for tonight, the time is now 10:43 and this meeting is adjourned.